headlines tonight out of Infowars.com. Bill Gates pours millions into geoengineering. This is also out of the Guardian newspaper with the headline, Bill Gates backs climate scientists lobbying for large-scale geoengineering. Microsoft founder Bill Gates continues to pour millions of dollars into high-risk geoengineering projects that purport to offer a solution to global warming, yet have been savaged by environmentalists as potentially posing a greater threat than climate change itself. Quote, concern is now growing that the small but influential group of scientists and their backers may have a disproportionate effect on major decisions about geoengineering research and policy, reports The Guardian, quoting critics who allege that Gates' funding has enabled geoengineering advocates to, quote, dominate the deliberations of the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And this investigation uncovers the fact that in one instance alone, Gates has funneled $4.6 million into the work of Professors David Keith of Harvard University and Ken Caldeira of Stanford. And they, of course, are vehement proponents of injecting the upper atmosphere with sulfur particles to supposedly reflect sunlight. And then we study the side effects for human beings that sulfur exposure involves: reproductive failure, behavioral changes, damage to the immune system, as well as damage to the liver, heart, and of course, stomach disorders. So, isn't it a fascinating coincidence that Bill Gates, whose financial support has bankrolled recent projects such as destroying sperm via ultrasound to make men sterile, the push to create vaccines in order to reduce the world's population, as Gates himself said at the 2010 TED conference, is now funding to the tune of millions of dollars geoengineering projects that threaten to cause reproductive failure in human beings. It's all part of the eugenics drive to sterilize men, which Gates is a vehement proponent of by his own statements and words. And we know that some form of mass geoengineering, of course, is already underway through the use of chemtrails, which this KSLA 2008 study, as we featured on many occasions, found that chemtrails were depositing toxic metals like barium into the atmosphere, which, when dissolved in water, can cause massive health problems. We recently had an interview with Skywatch chemtrail investigator Rosalind Peterson, who found that when these water samples were analysed, they contained these toxic chemicals like barium. She was then able to make the correlation that when chemtrails were observed, these same toxic compounds were found in the water supply. So we've got Gates funding this massive expansion of geoengineering research. It's going directly to these scientists, lobbying governments to push for massive public funding, not just private, into geoengineering projects to inject the upper atmosphere with sulfur. So even as the latest figures document how the planet has not warmed since 1997, the effort to initiate man-made climate change in the form of geoengineering that we know for a fact will have a negative impact on the environment continues unabated, with the generous backing of the eugenicist Bill Gates. And this ties into another headline out of the New York Times. Activists fight green projects seeing UN plot. And basically this article talks about how mainly Tea Party people at the local level are becoming more and more suspicious about UN environmental moves and the fact that they're related to property seizures and other feudal measures to take over their local rights in their local area. So basically the New York Times characterizes them all as weirdos believing in some outlandish UN conspiracy. But then a quote later on in the article actually admits that the foundation of their concerns are genuine. Quote, the protest date to 1992 when the United Nations passed a sweeping but non-binding 100-plus page resolution called Agenda 21 that was designed to encourage nations to use fewer resources and conserve open land by steering development to already dense areas. They have gained momentum in the past 2 years because of the emergence of the Tea Party, harnessing its suspicion about government power and belief that man-made global warming is a hoax. So while you've got the New York Times characterizing people who are concerned about this as weirdos, Bill Gates is funneling millions of his own his own dollars into geoengineering projects aimed at injecting the upper atmosphere with sulfur to supposedly fight global warming. Moving on to our next story, this is a major potential victory against the TSA. Infowars.com reports Senate to vote on bill that could kick TSA out of airports. Following House approval of the measure on Friday, the Senate is set to vote today on legislation that would allow the US airports to replace TSA workers with screeners from private companies, a move that could spell the beginning of the end for the highly unpopular federal agency's role in airport security. Quote, the US agency must allow airports to switch to private companies for screeners unless it can show the move wouldn't be cost effective and would be detrimental to security, according to the legislation, which if passed will go to President Barack Obama for his signature, reports Business Week. And what we're talking about here is HR 3038, the Airport Security Options Act. That was the version passed in the House on Friday. It's expected to be approved by the Senate today. Now, you'll recall at the height of the TSA backlash, airports in increasing numbers started exercising their right at the time to kick out TSA screeners and replace them with private security. And of course, TSA Chief John Pistole put a stop to this in January 2011 by placing a freeze on the ability of airports to opt out of having TSA screeners. And it, of course, was around the same time that Texas had this big fight with the feds over trying to ban invasive pat-downs, which led to Homeland Security threatening to enforce a no-fly zone over the Lone Star State. So what this legislation will do, which is expected to be approved today, is once again allow, as if airports as private companies should have ever not been allowed in the first place, allow them to once again kick out the TSA and replace them with their own private security, which in the process will create tens of thousands of jobs for the private sector. Good news on all fronts. So should it pass, this is going to be a major victory against the TSA, and it could mark a watershed moment in getting the TSA out of the airports. And then maybe we can turn our attention to, the subways, the bus depots, the highways, and everywhere else where this occupying federal army of criminally and sexually deviant goons has set up their network of internal checkpoints. So great news there with the fight to get the TSA out of the airports. Steve Watson, Infowars.com, headline, polls, half of Americans support attacking Iran. Two new polls ominously highlight that almost half of all Americans are willing to go along with attacking Iran in order to prevent the country from developing nuclear weapons. In a poll conducted by The Hill, 49% said military force should be used against Iran, with 62% of likely voters adding that they were somewhat or very concerned about Iran attacking the United States in a terrorist event. The poll found that just 31% did not approve of using military force, while 20% were undecided. So you've got two US warships just off the Gulf, the Strait of Hormuz, another one on its way. Iran is getting ready to launch more war games in the Strait of Hormuz. And Iran has been told directly, if you dare lift a finger when Israel attacks, then the United States will have its pretext for joining in the attack. So you might not even need a staged Gulf of Tonkin-like attack, as Dick Cheney's office war-gamed the potential for back in 2008, to launch yet another war. If Iran defends itself in any way, American interests suddenly are under attack. And the United States will merely be defending itself against the aggressor and will join in the war with Israel. That's how they've mapped it out. That's how they want it to go down. And so these polls show that half of the American people have forgotten, perhaps willingly, all about, weapons of mass destruction, Niger yellow cake, dodgy dossiers, and are willing to go along with it because, they're Giants fans and Iran are the Patriots or whoever, because they're the opposition. They think of global warfare in the context of the Super Bowl and not in terms of what it really will be, which is thousands of dead and maimed people, as we saw in Iraq. And if it escalates, potentially nuclear war on a global scale, if limited, but nuclear war nonetheless. Moving on to our next story. Did Madonna put on the greatest show on earth? Asks the Daily Mail. She declared she had to put on the greatest show on earth during the greatest show on earth, and Madonna certainly didn't disappoint. The singer, 53, put on an impressive performance during the halftime show of the NFL Super Bowl football game between the New York Giants and the New England Patriots. Impressive indeed, as the New York Observer notes, quote, "Most interesting for fans of Illuminati symbolism may be the detail that Madonna's halftime show improved upon the ratings of Bruce Springsteen's 2009 show by 20% and the Black Eyed Peas' 2011 show by 1%. So, New York Observer openly pointing out the fact that this was a complete exercise in Illuminati symbolism. Now look at these screenshots we've got from last night's Super Bowl performance by Madonna, and then you can also Google image search for yourself and type in Baphomet, and of course we see that Madonna is dressed up as Baphomet. She's sitting on the throne of Baphomet. She's got the horns. Later on, she's got the hand gestures of Baphomet, you know, one hand pointing up, one hand pointing down in the Egyptian dance pose. And this is the idol that the American people during Super Bowl halftime show are being told to worship. So, who's Baphomet? Baphomet is an idol used by Satanists to represent the devil. Or as Satanist Aleister Crowley once himself described it, quote, "This serpent, Satan, he is the devil of the book of Thoth, and his emblem is Baphomet." And also, as historical depictions show, Baphomet was worshipped by the Freemason secret society, which, of course, at its highest level, swears an oath to Lucifer. So this is an ancient pagan deity, which is used by Luciferians and occultists to symbolize the devil. Madonna is dressed up as Satan during this performance. So you've got her dressed up as a demon prancing around on a stage embedded with an all-seeing eye with pyramids in the background, and then at the end she's raised up on this pedestal while all the happy, clappy Christian gospel singers worship her. Right at the end the words "World Peace" appear on the stage. And then she's bowing down to the dark priest at the end and worshipping him. So, I mean, what's the message? That, you know, worshipping Satan is the only way the Illuminati will allow us to have world peace? Or, more simply, the American idiots half drunk watching the Super Bowl at half time will never get any of this Baphomet jazz, so we'll just throw it in their face and have a good laugh. And then, to top it all off, afterwards the news cycle is taken over by endless debate about how great the performance was and how this stupid dancer flipped off America. You know, even as the world teeters on the precipice of 2 wars in the Middle East, this is what the Twitter buzz is all about. You know, TiVo's talking about how many people played it back to watch it again, throwing it in our faces that they know everything about your viewing habits, not just what you watch when you watch it, but also each individual part that you watch again. Associated Press reports, quote, "TiVo has 2 million customers in the US. Spokesman Tara Matra said the company would check to see if more people play back the moment." So they've got TiVo looking into that. Madonna prancing around dressed up as Satan, all-seeing eyes, pyramids, worshipping the dark priest as the Christians all bow down to Satan. He's going to bring us world peace. So all in all, truly, truly bizarre and perfectly illustrative of how the modern-day Babylon system is the corporate entertainment system itself, and another outstanding reason why you should avoid it at all costs.